She walked alone through the dust until the wind brought a stranger. The sun had barely risen, but the small town was already awake in its quiet, dusty way. Elena adjusted the worn strap of her bag and stepped onto the cracked path that led through the heart of the village. The earth under her feet was dry and rough, and every step sent a small cloud of dust swirling around her ankles. The wind moved lazily through the trees, carrying the faint smell of dry leaves and baked soil. It was the kind of morning that promised little excitement, yet Elena had long learned that life had a way of bringing small surprises, whether one wanted them or not. Elena was 17, though the hardships of her days made her seem older than her years. She walked with a quiet strength, shoulders squared against the weight of her responsibilities. Every morning she rose before dawn, completing chores for her family before the rest of the town even stirred. There was the water to carry from the distant well, the garden to tend to, and the younger children who looked to her for guidance and care. Elena rarely complained, though she often felt the ache in her arms and legs. Her life was routine, filled with small struggles and quiet victories. The village was small, with houses made of sun-baked clay and roofs patched with tin and old wooden planks. Smoke rose from chimneys as families lit their morning fires, the scent of bread and roasted corn drifting through the air. Yet for all its familiarity, the town felt empty at times. People passed her by on the street, exchanging nods or quick greetings, but few stopped to truly see her. Elena often wondered if anyone noticed her at all. She moved through the dusty paths as though invisible, blending into the colors of her surroundings, the brown earth, the faded walls, and the pale sky overhead. Despite the solitude, Elena found small pleasures in her mornings. She liked to watch the way sunlight struck the edges of the houses, turning the dust into sparkling gold. She loved the sound of the wind as it rustled through the leaves, a sound that seemed almost like a whisper, carrying secrets she longed to understand. And she cherished the brief moments of laughter from her younger siblings, who would chase one another across the courtyard with boundless energy. In these moments, the world felt less heavy, less lonely, and Elena could almost forget the weight of her responsibilities. Yet the loneliness always returned. Elena had friends once, or at least people she thought were friends, but they had left, moving to bigger towns, seeking opportunities that the village could not offer. Now she walked alone, her thoughts her only companions. She wondered about life beyond the dusty streets and quiet houses, about what lay outside the hills that surrounded her home. She had never traveled beyond the village, and the world felt both inviting and intimidating at the same time. Sometimes she dreamed of leaving, of finding a place where she could belong and be seen. But other times, the thought of venturing into the unknown made her heart pound with fear. As she made her way toward the well, Elena's mind wandered to the stories her grandmother had told her, tales of distant lands, of people who faced hardships and still found joy, of winds that carried messages and strangers who brought change. Elena loved these stories not because they were entirely real, but because they hinted at a world that was bigger than the one she knew. She imagined herself walking along paths like the ones in those stories, meeting people who could teach her, guide her, or simply share a moment of connection. Yet, each time, the vision would fade, replaced by the familiar sight of the dusty town and the well she had to reach. The well itself was a long walk from her home, winding through fields of dry grass that whispered with every gust of wind. By the time Elena arrived, her hands were already dusty, and the sweat on her forehead glistened in the morning sun. She set down her bag and lowered the bucket into the well, letting the rope slip slowly through her fingers. The sound of water splashing into the bucket echoed softly in the empty space around her. She pulled it up, muscles straining, and balanced it carefully as she began the walk back home. Every day was much like this. One, simple, repetitive, yet not without small moments of wonder. Elena liked the way the wind sometimes shifted, carrying the scent of something unfamiliar. Flowers blooming in a distant garden, the tang of rain from the hills, or the smoke of a fire from someone she had never met. These small changes made her feel alive in a way that routine could not. They reminded her that the world was not completely predictable, that even in the smallest, dustiest corners of life, surprises could arrive. On this particular morning, as she walked back with the water, Elena noticed a group of children playing near the edge of the field. They ran and laughed, kicking up dust that twirled around their legs like small clouds. She smiled to herself, watching their energy and innocence. It reminded her of what it felt like to have no burdens, no worries, and no need to keep moving forward with careful, measured steps. Yet she could not stop herself from continuing her walk. She had learned long ago that life required persistence, and stopping, even for a moment, was a luxury she could rarely afford. As she moved on, the wind picked up slightly, carrying with it a sound that was unfamiliar, a soft rustling, different from the usual whispers of the grass and leaves. Elena paused, squinting into the distance. For a moment she thought it might be an animal, perhaps a stray dog or a wandering goat, but the sound seemed deliberate, purposeful. Her heart quickened, a mix of curiosity and caution taking hold. She shook her head, telling herself she was imagining things, and continued walking. Still, the sensation lingered, like a hint of something waiting just beyond her sight. By the time Elena reached the center of the village, the sun had risen higher, casting sharper shadows on the dusty paths. She set the bucket down and wiped her hands on her skirt, feeling the grit of the earth cling stubbornly to her skin. She looked around at the familiar streets, the quiet homes, and the few townspeople going about their morning routines. Even here, in the heart of everything she knew, there was a sense of emptiness, a quiet longing for something she could not name. Elena understood, better than anyone, the feeling of walking alone. She had done it so often that it had become a part of her identity. Yet beneath the strength, beneath the quiet determination, there was a flicker of hope. She knew, without knowing how, that her path would change someday. Something would arrive, something or someone that would break the monotony of dust and heat, of chores and loneliness. She did not know when or how or even if it would happen. But she believed it, as strongly as one believes in the wind, unseen, sometimes gentle, sometimes strong, but always moving. And so Elena continued her walk, bucket in hand, feet stirring the dry earth, mind full of stories and possibilities. The days stretched ahead of her, full of labor and responsibility, but also full of quiet wonder. In the distance, the horizon seemed to hold a secret, as if the world itself were waiting for her to notice. She did not yet know what the wind would bring, but she was ready to face whatever small or great change might step onto her dusty path. After the morning chores were done, Elena settled on the edge of the small courtyard behind her house. The sun climbed higher, painting the walls with harsh light, and she could feel the heat on her skin. The quiet of the village felt heavier in the afternoon, and the wind, that had been gentle in the morning, now swept dust across the empty streets. Elena watched as the leaves danced and the dust swirled, thinking about the same question she had been asking herself for years. Will anything ever change? Her friends had been gone for some time now. One by one they had left the village, seeking work or education in the larger towns nearby. Some had written letters at first, sharing news of new streets and busy markets, of teachers and schools, and even of small victories they had achieved. But over time, the letters stopped. Elena had watched the mailbox every day, hoping for a sign that the world outside had not forgotten her. But it remained empty, much like her quiet afternoons. Loneliness had become a familiar companion. Even in a crowd, she felt invisible. The villagers were kind enough, polite even, but most were too focused on their own survival to notice her in any meaningful way. They nodded politely when she passed, sometimes offered small greetings, but never lingered to ask about her day or her dreams. Elena understood that life was hard for everyone here, that the dust and the heat left little room for idle conversation or shared moments. Still, the emptiness pressed on her heart. Her grandmother, who had raised her since she was a small child, noticed this quiet sadness. "You are strong, Elena," her grandmother said one afternoon, rocking slowly in her wooden chair. "But even the strongest need something to hold on to, someone to remind them that the world is bigger than this village." Elena had nodded, not knowing how to explain the restless feeling inside her. She wanted more than strength. She wanted connection. She wanted a life that felt like it had been painted with color, not just dust. Elena spent her days walking the same paths, doing the same chores, but her mind wandered to faraway places. She imagined forests so green that the leaves shimmered in the sunlight like jewels, rivers that sparkled and ran freely without being blocked by dry soil, and towns where laughter echoed through the streets and strangers smiled at one another as if they had always known each other. These visions were vivid and bright, yet they made the village feel even smaller, its dusty roads and cracked walls more confining. Sometimes she would sit for hours at the edge of the fields, staring at the horizon where the hills met the sky. She listened carefully to the wind, wondering if it carried stories from other places. The sound of leaves rustling, the distant crow of a bird, even the hum of insects felt like a language only she could understand. She imagined that maybe, just maybe, the wind could bring more than dust. It could bring something new, something unexpected, someone who would change the shape of her days. Despite her daydreams, reality always returned with a quiet weight. Her family depended on her, and the chores never stopped. She watered the small garden, feeding the plants with careful hands, though most of them struggled in the dry soil. She helped her younger siblings with lessons, teaching them to write letters and count numbers, sharing what little knowledge she had gained from school. The work was tiring, but it reminded her of her own resilience. Even if she felt unseen, she was making a difference. One small act at a time. One afternoon, as she walked toward the well again, Elena noticed something unusual. The air felt different, charged in a way she could not explain. The wind swirled more strongly, carrying the scent of something she did not recognize. It was faint, but there, a hint of flowers, perhaps, or the fresh smell of rain from somewhere beyond the hills. She stopped, shielding her eyes from the sun, trying to see what lay ahead. But the streets were empty, the same cracked walls and dusty paths as always. Still, the sensation lingered, as if the wind had whispered a secret meant just for her. That evening, as the sun began to set, the village seemed even quieter than usual. Elena sat on the steps outside her home, the golden light casting long shadows across the courtyard. She thought about the people who had left, about the friends she had once shared laughter and stories with. She missed them terribly, yet she felt a strange hope rising in her chest. Perhaps the world had not forgotten her. Perhaps there were others out there, moving through the vastness of life, just waiting for paths to cross. As night fell, Elena's thoughts returned to her grandmother's stories, tales of strangers arriving when least expected, of wind carrying messages, of moments that could change a life forever. She closed her eyes, listening to the quiet hum of the village. Somewhere beyond the hills, the world moved on, unaware of the small struggles of a girl in a dusty town. And yet, she felt certain that one day the world would reach her just as surely as the wind moved across the fields. In the days that followed, Elena's routine continued, but something inside her had shifted. She walked with a little more attention to the subtle changes in her surroundings, listening more closely to the wind, the birds, the distant laughter of children playing beyond her sight. She began to notice the small acts of kindness from neighbors, someone sharing water when her bucket broke, a neighbor offering vegetables from a hidden garden, a child leaving her a small stone painted like a sun. Each gesture reminded her that even in solitude, connection existed. Even in the dust, life found a way to shine. The loneliness was still there, but it no longer weighed as heavily on her spirit. Elena learned to carry it differently, not as a burden, but as a quiet companion that made her notice the little moments more deeply. She began to speak more often to herself, narrating her thoughts, sharing her dreams aloud, even if no one was there to hear them. This simple act gave her strength. It reminded her that her voice mattered, even if it echoed only in the empty streets and over the dry fields. One afternoon, Elena wandered farther than usual, past the edge of the familiar fields and closer to the hills she had always admired from a distance. She noticed how the light shifted as she climbed, how the air smelled fresher and cooler. A single bird flew overhead, its wings casting a fleeting shadow across her path. For a moment, she felt as if she were stepping into one of her grandmother's stories, a place where anything could happen, where paths could change with a single choice. She paused, breathing in the cool air, feeling the wind play with her hair. It was a small but powerful reminder that the world was wider than her village, and that the possibilities were endless. That night, as she lay on the thin mattress in her small room, Elena reflected on the day. The village was quiet, the wind outside whispering through the cracks in the walls. She thought about her small joys, the laughter of children, the kindness of neighbors, the vivid imagination that painted life in colors beyond dust and sun. And she thought about the feeling she could not name, the quiet certainty that something was coming, something that would arrive without warning, like a sudden gust of wind, and change everything she thought she knew about her life. Elena drifted to sleep with her mind full of questions, yet her heart lightened with hope. The days of solitude had taught her patience, resilience, and the quiet strength of walking alone. But she knew, deep down, that the wind would not always bring only dust. One day it would carry something new, something unexpected, and she would be ready to meet it. Until then, she would continue her walks, her chores, her small acts of care and courage, knowing that the world was larger, brighter, and more alive than it had ever seemed. It was early morning when Elena first noticed something different in the air. The wind blew stronger than usual, rustling the dry grass and lifting clouds of dust from the cracked streets. At first, she thought it was just another gust, another ordinary shift in the weather that marked the coming of the day. But there was something unusual about it, something almost alive. The wind seemed to carry a sound this time, a faint shuffle, like footsteps along the empty paths beyond the village. Curiosity tugged at Elena, stronger than caution. She had learned to trust her instincts, the small, quiet feelings that told her when something was about to happen. She followed the path toward the edge of the village, where the fields met the hills, the place she often visited to watch the horizon. The sound grew clearer, slow, deliberate steps, yet there was a gentleness to them, not hurried or threatening. Elena's heart began to race, a mix of excitement and nervousness she could not explain. She paused at the bend in the dusty path, squinting into the early sunlight. There, in the shimmer of dust rising from the earth, she saw a figure. A man, or perhaps a young traveler, walking alone, carrying a small bundle tied to a stick over his shoulder. He moved with quiet purpose, each step measured, careful not to disturb the stillness around him. Elena's first instinct was to step back, to hide behind a tree or the wall of a nearby house. She had spent so long walking alone that the sudden presence of another person, unknown and unannounced, felt strange and unsettling. Yet something in his eyes, the way he looked around, curious and observant, told her he was not a threat. There was a calmness in his expression, a gentle smile that reached the corners of his eyes, and it reminded Elena of the stories her grandmother had told, the tales of travelers arriving unexpectedly, carrying gifts of knowledge, kindness, or change. She held her breath, unsure whether to move forward or remain hidden, and watched as he paused at the edge of the field, glancing toward her with a quiet acknowledgement. Finally, Elena stepped onto the path, brushing dust from her skirt. "Hello," she called softly, her voice trembling slightly, a mix of caution and hope. The stranger looked up fully, his eyes meeting hers with warmth. "Hello," he replied, his voice calm, steady, and strangely comforting. There was no hint of danger, only the openness of someone who understood the quiet weight of a solitary walk. They stood in silence for a moment, sizing each other up. Elena noticed the traveler's clothes were worn but clean, his shoes dusty from the journey, his hands strong from labor. His presence felt like a small shift in the world, as though the wind itself had decided to carry him to her. Elena's curiosity grew, and she stepped closer, the nerves in her chest mixing with a strange excitement. "What brings you here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The stranger smiled again. "I am just passing through," he said. "I follow the wind, and it brought me here. Sometimes it leads you to places you never expected to see." Elena tilted her head, unsure whether he spoke literally or in some poetic way, but she could not deny that his words felt true. There was a sense of purpose in him, a feeling that he had a story of his own, one that might intertwine with hers. Over the next few minutes they walked along the edge of the village, exchanging small talk. The stranger told her a little about his journey. He had traveled through small towns and fields, following work where it was needed, helping wherever he could. He spoke of challenges he had faced, of long walks under the sun, of nights spent sleeping under the stars, and Elena felt a connection forming. It was not immediate friendship, but something subtler, a recognition that two people alone in the world could understand each other without speaking too much. Elena shared pieces of her life as well, cautiously at first. She told him about her family, about the chores that filled her days, about the small joys she found in the children's laughter and the quiet moments in the fields. She spoke of the dreams she had never shared with anyone, the ones that made her heart ache with longing. The stranger listened without interruption, his gaze steady, as if he were seeing not just her words but the life behind them. For the first time in many years, Elena felt truly heard. As the sun climbed higher, the traveler set down his bundle, offering Elena some water from a small flask he carried. They drank in silence, the wind swirling around them, carrying the faint scent of distant hills and unknown flowers. Elena realized that this meeting was unlike anything she had experienced before. The wind had indeed brought a stranger, as her grandmother's stories had promised, but it was more than that. It had brought a person who could understand her, who could share a moment of calm in a life filled with routine and dust. The stranger asked if he could rest at the edge of the village for a short time. Elena hesitated, thinking of her family and the unspoken rules of the town, but something inside her urged her to say yes. She led him to a small, shaded area near the old well, where the air was cooler and the dust settled more slowly. He set down his bundle, and they sat together, watching the wind carry loose leaves and tiny clouds of dirt across the paths. The quiet between them was comfortable, not awkward, and Elena felt a warmth she had not felt in a long time. For hours they spoke in small bursts, sharing stories of journeys and lives, of hopes and challenges. The stranger spoke of places Elena had only imagined, describing rolling green hills, rivers that gleamed like silver, and towns alive with laughter and color. Elena listened, eyes wide, heart racing, imagining herself walking alongside him through the vastness of the world. And when she spoke, he listened with care, never rushing her words, never dismissing the small details of her daily life that she thought were unimportant. As the afternoon stretched on, Elena realized that her world had shifted in subtle ways. The village, once so familiar and dusty, now felt alive with possibilities. She noticed small details she had ignored before, the way the sunlight fell through the cracks in the walls, the songs of the birds hidden in the trees, the faint smell of rain from the distant hills. She felt that something had changed within her, a spark of hope that perhaps her life would not always be defined by solitude and routine. Eventually, the stranger rose to continue his journey. Elena felt a pang of disappointment, but she understood. "Will you return?" she asked quietly. He shook his head gently. "Perhaps," he said. "But even if I do not, the wind will carry more than just me. It carries change. It carries new paths, new meetings, new stories. You only need to notice them." Elena watched him walk away, each step kicking up small clouds of dust, the wind playing with the edges of his cloak. She felt the weight of his presence linger, a reminder that life could surprise her, that change could arrive when she least expected it. After he disappeared beyond the edge of the fields, Elena sat alone again, the wind settling softly around her. She thought about the stranger, about the calmness in his eyes, about the stories he had shared. She realized that the wind had brought more than a visitor. It had brought a new way of seeing the world. Even if the stranger never returned, his presence had left a mark, a reminder that life was larger than the village, that paths could intersect in unexpected ways, and that hope could arrive even in the dustiest corners of existence. That evening, as she walked home with her chores, Elena carried a sense of quiet determination. The world was wider than she had imagined, and the loneliness she had carried for so long no longer felt like a cage. She knew that challenges remained, that the village still demanded her care, that life's routines were relentless. But she also knew that change could come, carried on the wind, in the form of strangers, stories, or even small moments that opened new possibilities. And as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold, Elena whispered to herself, a small smile playing on her lips, "The wind is not just dust. It brings stories. It brings people. And one day, it will bring even more." The next morning, the village felt the same, quiet, dusty, and still. But Elena walked with a new lightness in her step. The memory of the stranger lingered in her mind like a soft song, and she could not help but glance toward the horizon, imagining him walking along the paths beyond the hills. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility stirring inside her. The world was bigger than the village, bigger than the chores, bigger than the routine that had defined her life for so long. Elena continued her daily tasks with the same care she always had, But her thoughts were different now. The water from the well felt less heavy in her arms, the garden less burdensome, the sun on her back less oppressive. She moved through the village, noticing things she had overlooked for years. The small cracks in the walls that caught the sunlight just right, the wildflowers pushing through the dry soil, the gentle songs of birds hidden in the trees. Every detail reminded her that life, even in its simplest form, was full of surprises waiting to be discovered. Days passed, and Elena often found herself near the edge of the village, hoping to catch a glimpse of the stranger again. She did not know why she felt this pull. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was something deeper, a sense that their meeting had been meant to teach her something. Then, one afternoon, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint sound of footsteps and the soft rustle of a bag moving across the path. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She followed the sound, careful to stay hidden behind a small grove of trees. There he was, the stranger, walking toward the village again. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and this time, Elena stepped forward without hesitation. "You came back," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "I wondered if you would." He shrugged lightly, a gentle grin spreading across his face. "The wind brought me," he replied simply, as though that explained everything. "And it seems it brought me to you again." They began to walk together, side by side, along the dusty paths that stretched beyond the village. Conversation flowed more easily this time, laughter slipping naturally between words. Elena learned his name, Matthias, and he learned hers. They spoke of their lives, of small joys and struggles, of dreams that seemed too large for a village, but not impossible when shared with someone who understood. Elena felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of companionship that she had longed for but never thought she would find. Over the next few days, Matthias stayed in the village, helping with small tasks and sharing stories of his travels. He showed Elena different ways to carry water without straining her arms, to tend the garden more efficiently, and even how to notice small patterns in the wind and sky that could predict weather changes. Elena watched and learned, amazed at how much she could grow in such a short time simply by paying attention and listening. But life was never without its challenges. Some villagers were wary of Matthias, suspicious of the stranger who had arrived without notice. A few whispered among themselves, questioning why he was there and whether he could be trusted. Elena noticed their glances, the way they paused in conversation when he passed, and she felt a protective surge rise within her. Matthias, however, remained calm, never raising his voice or showing anger. Instead, he continued his work quietly, letting his actions speak for him. One afternoon, as they walked to fetch water from the well together, a sudden storm rolled in from the hills. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and the wind picked up, scattering dust and debris across the path. Elena felt a pang of fear. Storms could be dangerous in the village, especially when the soil turned to slippery mud and the wind threatened to knock branches from the trees. Matthias grabbed her hand, steadying her. "Stay close," he said, his voice calm. "We will get through this together." They ran toward the well, helping one another over slippery stones and fallen branches. Elena realized in that moment how much stronger she felt with someone beside her, someone who did not judge her for her solitude or underestimate her because of her youth. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving the air fresh and cool, the earth smelling of rain. Elena and Matthias laughed together, soaked but exhilarated, and she felt a deeper bond forming between them, one built on trust, courage, and shared experience. In the following weeks, Elena noticed a shift in her own confidence. She began to speak more freely to neighbors, sharing ideas and helping others with small tasks. She walked taller, moved faster, and carried herself with a quiet determination that seemed to surprise even her. Matthias encouraged her at every step, never pushing but always guiding, showing her that she could trust herself as much as she trusted him. They also spent quiet moments together, sitting near the edge of the village, under the shade of a tree, sharing dreams of distant places. Matthias spoke of towns with markets that never slept, forests that were alive with colors, and rivers that reflected the sky so clearly they seemed magical. Elena listened, imagining herself there, and realized that she did not need to wait for someone else to take her. She could begin preparing herself for the journey when the time came. Yet, challenges continued. One morning, a neighbor confronted Elena about Matthias, asking why she spent so much time with a stranger. Elena felt the familiar weight of judgment, the same one she had felt when walking alone through the village. But this time she did not shrink. She spoke calmly, explaining that Matthias was a friend, someone who had shown her kindness and understanding, someone who had helped her see the world differently. The neighbor listened, silent, and eventually walked away. Elena realized that she had grown not just in skill or knowledge, but in courage, the courage to speak for herself, to stand firm in her choices. Their days together were filled with small adventures. They explored the edges of the village, discovering hidden streams and forgotten paths. They helped repair fences and clear debris after storms. They even taught the younger children how to play simple games that made their afternoons brighter. Each shared moment deepened their connection, and Elena began to understand that companionship was not just about presence. It was about shared effort, mutual respect, and understanding the unspoken needs of another person. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Elena and Matthias sat together on a small hill overlooking the village. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of rain from the distant hills. Elena felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time in her life, she did not feel alone, nor did she feel invisible. The world, once confined to dust and routine, now stretched out endlessly before her. She realized that she had learned something important. The change often comes slowly, in small steps, through shared moments and quiet guidance. Matthias turned to her and smiled. "You have grown so much in a short time," he said. "You are stronger than you know, Elena. The village may have taught you resilience, but you have learned courage on your own." Elena smiled back, feeling the truth in his words. She knew that her journey was just beginning, that there were challenges yet to come, but she also knew that she could face them with confidence. She would not be alone, and she would not be afraid. As night fell, they walked back to the village together, the stars beginning to twinkle overhead. Elena realized that her life had changed in ways she could not have imagined just a few weeks ago. The dusty paths were still there, the chores still waited, and the village still held its quiet routines. But she had discovered a new world within herself, a world of courage, connection, and possibility. And she knew that no matter what happened next, she was ready to face it. The days continued with the same mixture of work and adventure, of learning and laughter. Elena and Matthias became a familiar sight in the village, their partnership growing stronger with each shared experience. The villagers began to notice the change in her, her confidence, her strength, and the calm way she handled challenges. Slowly, the whispers of suspicion faded, replaced by a quiet respect. Elena realized that the stranger had brought more than companionship. He had brought a reflection of the person she could become, a reminder that the world held more than dust and routine. And so, Elena walked through her days with renewed purpose, alongside Matthias, learning, growing, and discovering the beauty of shared journeys. The wind that had once brought only dust now carried possibility, connection, and the promise of change. She knew that challenges would continue to come, that storms would rise and paths would twist, but she was no longer afraid. She had found strength, courage, and friendship in the most unexpected way, and she knew that whatever lay ahead, she would face it with a steady heart and open mind. The days grew warmer, and the village began to glow under the bright sun. Elena walked through the dusty streets with a sense of calm that she had never felt before. Her chores were still there, the water to carry, the garden to tend, and the children to care for. But something inside her had changed. She no longer moved as a girl weighed down by loneliness. She moved as someone who had learned that life could be bigger than the dusty paths, bigger than the quiet village walls, and bigger than her own fears. Matthias was still by her side, his presence now familiar, comforting, and steady. They had shared countless days exploring hidden paths, helping neighbors, and learning from each other. Elena often thought about the first time the wind had brought him to her, how strange and sudden it had felt, and how much that single encounter had changed her life. She realized that the wind did not just carry dust, it carried opportunity, hope, and the chance to discover what the world could offer if one was willing to notice. One morning, as the sun rose behind the hills, Elena woke with a determination she had not felt before. She had decided that it was time to do more than follow the routines of the village. She wanted to make a difference, not only for herself, but for the people around her. The past weeks with Matthias had shown her that small actions could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she had not imagined. She wanted to bring a sense of hope to her neighbors, to help them see that even in difficult times, change was possible. Elena began by tending to the garden with renewed energy. She taught the younger children to plant seeds carefully, to water with patience, and to watch as life slowly grew from the dry soil. She shared techniques she had learned from Matthias, showing neighbors how to care for their own small plots of land so that they could produce more food. Slowly, the village began to notice her efforts. People stopped to watch, to ask questions, and sometimes to join in. Elena realized that courage and care were contagious, and that her own confidence inspired others to act as well. In the afternoon, she and Matthias explored the fields and the hills beyond the village. They discovered small streams, hidden groves of trees, and even forgotten paths that led to breathtaking views of the countryside. Elena felt the wind on her face, carrying the scent of rain, fresh grass, and wildflowers. It reminded her of the first time she had noticed the stranger arriving, of the way the wind had shifted her life. Every step along those paths now felt purposeful, filled with discovery and learning. Yet life still had challenges to test her. One evening, as the sky turned orange and pink, a sudden storm rose from the hills. Dark clouds rolled quickly, and the wind howled through the village streets, carrying dust and debris. Elena's younger siblings were frightened, and neighbors struggled to secure their homes and livestock. But Elena remained calm. She guided her family and neighbors, showing them how to stay safe, how to carry buckets and secure loose items, and how to support one another during the storm. Matthias worked alongside her, steady and encouraging. Together they turned fear into action, and by the time the storm passed, the village had survived intact. The villagers began to see Elena differently after that storm. No longer just a quiet girl who walked alone through dusty paths, she became a symbol of resilience and courage. People came to her for advice, for help, and sometimes just for conversation. She learned to speak with confidence, to listen with patience, and to lead with compassion. Elena realized that her life had transformed, not because the world had changed around her, but because she had discovered the strength within herself to shape it. In the evenings, when the work was done, Elena and Matthias would sit under the stars, talking quietly about the day, the past, and the future. Matthias reminded her that the wind would continue to bring change, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, and that she had the power to choose how she would meet it. Elena understood that her journey was ongoing, that the dusty paths of the village were only one chapter of a much larger story. She felt ready for whatever came next, confident that she could face the unknown without fear. One day, as they walked together along a hill overlooking the village, Elena turned to Matthias and spoke softly. "Do you think the wind will bring someone else? Another stranger?" Matthias smiled. "Perhaps," he said. "But remember, the wind also carries you. You have learned to see it, to feel it, and to let it guide you. You do not need another stranger to change your life. You have already begun to do it yourself." Elena nodded, understanding the truth in his words. She had grown stronger, braver, and more aware of her own abilities. The wind had brought Matthias to her, but she had found the power to carry change within herself. As the weeks turned into months, the village began to change in small but meaningful ways. Gardens flourished, children played with more joy, and neighbors worked together with newfound energy and cooperation. Elena had become a quiet leader, guiding and encouraging without demanding attention. She saw how small acts of courage, care, and kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she had never imagined when she had first walked alone through the dusty streets. Elena also noticed changes in herself. She no longer felt invisible or uncertain. Her confidence grew, not arrogantly, but with quiet assurance. She moved through the village with awareness, noticing details that once escaped her, the way sunlight reflected off the rooftops, the sounds of the children laughing in the courtyard, the smell of bread baking in a neighbor's kitchen. Life felt fuller, richer, and more meaningful. She realized that true change came not only from what arrived from the outside, but also from what one nurtured within. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the wind carried a cool scent from the hills, Elena walked alone for a moment along the edge of the village. She paused, looking at the horizon, remembering the girl who had walked these paths alone, feeling invisible and uncertain. That girl seemed far away now. She had become someone stronger, wiser, and more capable. The wind whispered around her, stirring the dust and leaves, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had walked alone, yes, but she had also learned to welcome the unexpected, to trust herself, and to embrace life fully. When she returned home, she found Matthias waiting with a small bundle of wildflowers he had collected from the fields. He handed them to her with a quiet smile. "For the courage you have shown," he said simply. Elena accepted them, feeling the significance of the gesture. The flowers, bright and delicate, were a reminder that even in a dusty, harsh world, beauty and hope could thrive. And they reminded her that life, when shared with care and courage, could be richer than she had ever imagined. That night, as she lay on her thin mattress, Elena reflected on her journey. She remembered the lonely walks through dust, the endless chores, the quiet afternoons spent dreaming of another life. She thought of the stranger who had arrived on the wind, who had shown her that connection and guidance could open doors to something new. And she realized, with quiet certainty, that the journey was never really about the stranger. It was about the strength she had found in herself, the courage to face challenges, and the openness to embrace what life could bring. In the days that followed, Elena continued her life with renewed purpose. She worked, she learned, she guided, and she explored, carrying the lessons of the past months with her. She had discovered that solitude could teach resilience, that kindness could inspire others, and that hope could arrive even in the dustiest corners of the world. The village, once quiet and predictable, now felt alive with possibility. and Elena had become a living proof that change was always possible for those willing to see it. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Elena stood at the edge of the village with Matthias. The wind blew gently around them, carrying the faint scent of distant flowers and fresh earth. She smiled, feeling the warmth of the day and the quiet strength she had built within herself. She knew that the wind would continue to bring surprises, challenges, and opportunities, but she also knew that she was ready, that she was no longer the girl who had walked alone through the dust. Elena took a deep breath, feeling the wind sweep around her like an old friend. She looked at the horizon, at the hills, the fields, and the paths that stretched beyond the village. For the first time, she felt a sense of complete freedom, not freedom from responsibility, but freedom in knowing that she could face life's challenges, embrace its beauty, and shape her own path. And she whispered softly, almost to herself, "The wind brought change, and I am ready to meet whatever comes next." The village slept under the stars, quiet and peaceful, but Elena's heart was full of life. She had walked alone through dust and uncertainty, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and full of hope. And as the wind blew gently across the fields, carrying with it the promise of new stories, new meetings, and new beginnings, Elena knew that her journey had only just begun.